My phone buzzed with a text message, the kind that usually meant a quick running late or pick up milk. But this message, this one was different. It was from Mark, my husband of 10 years. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old babe. I've already emptied our joint account, haha. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf in my boutique. The only outward sign that my world had just imploded was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my response. Good luck. My name is Claire, and at 38 I just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Mark was probably picturing me in a puddle of tears, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work that never matched his pay deposits, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously, buying new clothes, trying to recapture his youth. 3 months ago, I'd found a receipt for dinner for 2 at an expensive restaurant on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That same evening, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he mentioned wanting to combine our accounts to simplify things, I'd agreed cheerfully while moving my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he'd just emptied, it contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious, about 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I'd met her at the company Christmas party, watched her laugh too loudly at Mark's jokes, noticed how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I'd found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move. The papers are ready, she replied. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush. Let him think he's won first. Another text from Mark. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful boutique I'd built from scratch. The one that generated more income than his middle management position. The one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in Miami. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. I spent that evening in our house. My house, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother and kept it in my name, despite Mark's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. Another lucky instinct that had paid off. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need, I found our wedding album. Mark looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days he wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man of 45. My phone kept buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. Already told my family. They agree we grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder, let him dig his hole deeper. My lawyer would love his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. The last text caught my attention. BTW. I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company. Mrs. Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can you identify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to Miami booked today. Hotel charges at the Royal Palm. And I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have documentation of the fraud? Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Mark and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated, their hotel reservation canceled. My phone buzzed again. "Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller." I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. "And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half." My half? Of my business that I'd built myself, funded myself, grown myself while he complained about my long hours and called it my hobby? I poured a glass of wine, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Tomorrow, Mark would learn some hard truths about property law and separate assets. But tonight I'd enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter. Morning brought a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Mark. "What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me." I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on, even when your husband runs off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. "Claire, dear, Mark told us everything about how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while I arranged a window display. "Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card?" Silence. Then, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant." "Barbara, I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or maybe the one where he mocked my age?" Another pause. "He did seem a bit cruel." I told him the text message was inappropriate. "I appreciate the call, Barbara. I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Mark's family during the proceedings." "Proceedings? Already? Goodbye, Barbara." By late afternoon, Mark's sister, Amanda, was spreading family gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Mark and Melissa were stuck at a budget motel near the airport, their Miami dreams temporarily derailed. He'd tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag I'd noted. My lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet, but he'll get the papers at his new motel address. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about you. I smiled, thinking of my own documentation. A year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, text messages that proved premeditation. Mark had been so focused on his grand escape that he'd never considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed with another text. "You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique financial records. Half that business is mine." I forwarded the text to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Mark's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being prepared. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I could have hoped for. Mark showed up in his new young wardrobe. Designer jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer presented our evidence methodically. Mark's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses, each piece carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Mark's hastily hired lawyer attempted. My client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? My lawyer countered. You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive, that's smart business. The judge reviewed my documentation. The separate property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name only, the careful separation of business and personal finances that Mark had always complained about. Mr. Harrison, the judge addressed Mark directly. You admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Mark shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make a clean break. By committing financial fraud? The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets? The business grew during our marriage, Mark's lawyer tried again. My client is entitled to... The business was established before the marriage, my lawyer interrupted, and Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched Mark's face as reality started sinking in. He thought this would be easy. Empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He'd never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping things separate, had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, the judge announced. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. But that money's gone, Mark protested. We spent it on... Then I suggest you find a way to replace it, the judge cut him off. And Mr. Harrison, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with paramours. Outside the courthouse, I heard Melissa asking Mark about their Miami plans. His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor, heading back to the business he'd never understood or respected. The next few weeks brought a string of increasingly desperate moves from Mark. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea, that he remembered investing money in its early days. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along, claims quickly disproven by my meticulous records. He's getting desperate, my lawyer observed. His girlfriend's social media shows they're staying at her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined. Mark's family started reaching out, their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. We had no idea, his sister Amanda admitted during an unexpected visit to the boutique. He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. My lawyer kept me updated on Mark's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied, his claims of unfair distribution dismissed based on the evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, she told me, laughing. The judge asked if that made theft less illegal. The boutique's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. The best protection is preparation, I told one young woman who reminded me of Melissa. And always trust your instincts. Mark's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd done something particularly self-destructive. He tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He'd gotten involved with a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle just dug him deeper into trouble. I don't know where we went wrong with him, she sighed during one call. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else. You, Melissa, his company, the judge. I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third boutique location and a possible expansion into luxury accessories. The only reminder of Mark's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number: "Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Below it sat my latest business award, proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted a grand opening for my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, and the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Mark's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever, or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I believed everything he told me about how you were cold, controlling, how you didn't support his dreams." Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me, she continued. "When things got tough, I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference." "I know that now." She paused, then added, "He tried to move in when you froze the accounts. Thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes. I actually laughed at that. Let me guess. He had big plans but no way to fund them?" "Exactly. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value." She shook her head. "I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment, but at least we're building something real." After she left, my assistant manager whispered, "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did." Speaking of lessons, I gestured to a young couple examining our designer handbags. "Let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line." The boutique had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, of resilience, of the power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs often sought my advice, and I always emphasized the importance of protecting their assets. Mark's mother called one last time, not to discuss Mark, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson," she said, "about enabling bad behavior, about making excuses for cruelty. Mark's still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems, but we're not defending him anymore. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them." I thought about that legacy as I reviewed plans for a fourth location. Mark had intended to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model and take half of everything I'd built. Instead, he'd inadvertently pushed me to become even stronger, more successful. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Mark filed another petition to revisit the settlement. Judge dismissed it immediately and ordered him to pay court costs. Thought you'd enjoy that. I smiled, thinking of him in his childhood bedroom, still trying to rewrite an ending that had been determined the moment he underestimated me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. 2 years after Mark's cruel text message, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful business. My story had evolved from cautionary tale to inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman asked about keeping business and personal finances separate. "My husband says I'm being paranoid. That marriage means sharing everything." "My ex-husband said the same thing," I replied, "right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce." Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. The boutique chain had grown to 5 locations, each more successful than the last. The little shop Mark had mocked now employed 30 people and had been featured in several national magazines. Through mutual friends, I heard Mark had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. He'd had to take a lower-paying job after his former company downsized, eliminating his position during restructuring. His dating profile still listed him as young at heart, though his profile photo was clearly outdated. Melissa, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique location. She'd earned her business degree and started her own social media consulting company. "You inspired me," she told me once, showing how a woman can build something lasting instead of falling for empty promises. I kept Mark's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I'd come. Below it hung a sign that read, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my original boutique, I stood addressing my employees and loyal customers. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the flagship store of a thriving business empire. Mark's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me. "I saw Mark yesterday," she said, smoothing her designer dress, one she'd bought from my store. "He's not doing well. He talks about you a lot, about how he regrets everything." I simply nodded. There was nothing left to say. Mark had tried to write me out of his story, but in doing so, he'd inadvertently made me the author of my own. And mine was a story of resilience, of success, and of the quiet power that comes from knowing your own worth. Story 2. This narrative has a title. After using my college funds to care for my sister, my parents pleaded with me to spend Christmas at home. They are now pleading after I exacted my retribution. Hello, everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello, everyone. I'm a 28-year-old woman that needs to vent. The narrative is a little lengthy, but I must put it in writing. My name is Mel, and I haven't spoken to either my sister or my parents. 8 years from now, I'll name her Jen. I'm not sure how to begin, but here we go. This large financial business downtown is where I work. Those lofty buildings with the elegant lobby where everyone is dressed in suits, you know? One of those indeed. I do my work well, had enough saved to purchase a home. And I'm married to a 32-year-old man named Dan, who is an excellent lawyer. To be honest, things weren't always this way, but now they're doing rather well. It was always about my sister Jen when I was growing up. My parents pampered her as if she were flawless, even though she is 3 years older. They thought everything she did was fantastic. Received a C+ in mathematics. She did her best, at least. Left college early. Not everyone is cut out for college. Married a man she met at a petrol station when she was 19. Young love is very lovely. In the meantime, I was studying really hard, earning straight A's, trying to get into a decent college, and working part-time at this dull office supply business. However, my efforts were never sufficient. For example, they would have said, "That's nice, honey," if I had found a cure for cancer. However, have you seen Jen's new hairstyle? When I received my letter of acceptance to college, the real issue began. For me, having a partial scholarship to study finance was quite important. This has been in the works for ages. My dad's mother, my grandma, had left money for my schooling. In addition to my savings and scholarship, it wasn't much. Everything would have been covered. Maybe, just maybe, they would be proud of me at last, I thought as I ran home that day. I discovered my mother, as usual, going through her phone while seated on the couch. Dad was watching TV in his normal recliner. "Parents?" I entered. I held up the letter to them. Mom hardly raised her head. "That's good. Sweetheart, could we then discuss the college fund?" Grandma's money, you know. Dad shut off the television at that point. That is never a good indication. He began to avoid looking at me by performing that thing. We needed to do something different with that money. I received the impression that I had been doused with freezing water. What are you saying? You are aware of how costly weddings are these days, and Jen's wedding is approaching. I simply stood there, attempting to take in what I was listening to. My education funds had been stolen by them. My grandmother used the funds she gave me expressly for my schooling to pay for Jen's third wedding. Yes, you read correctly. Third, by the age of 23, she had already experienced 2 unsuccessful marriages. I went crazy, began shouting that it was unjust. How Jen was always chosen over me. Mom became defensive, and that I should be pleased for my sister and that I was being selfish. As usual, when there was a disagreement, Dad merely sat there looking uneasy. I packed my things and departed that evening. I just took what my automobile could hold. To get to Aunt Pat's residence, I took a car. My mom claims she is overly opinionated. Therefore, even though she is her sister, they almost ever speak. Interpretation. In fact, Aunt Pat confronts them about their BBS. Without doubt, Aunt Pat took me in. She had been saving for her son's college fund, but he had died a few years before in a car accident, I learned later. I only accepted her offer of college financial aid on the proviso that I repay her in full. It was difficult in college, really harsh. I worked at this cafe that usually smelled like burned coffee while I was enrolled in full-time studies. In order to preserve my scholarship, I had to maintain a specific GPA. I essentially lived at the library as a result. But what do you know? I succeeded, graduated with distinction. Within 2 years, I got a position at the financial business where I currently work and paid Aunt Pat back in full. I met Dan there as well. We continued bumping into each other in the break room while he handled some legal matters for the firm. The rest is history. He asked me out for coffee. Things were finally going well after we were married and purchased a home last year. It had been a long time since I had spoken to my folks, similar to no touch. Nothing. No emails, no calls. Jen never used my number, even though she had it. Probably because Aunt Pat told them my parents sent a card upon my graduation, but that was about it. That's the backstory then. All of this had to be explained. Thus, what followed made sense. But last Christmas, it all began. My Aunt Pat had been acting strangely for days, so I know I should have anticipated it, as if she would speak on the phone and then stop herself. However, I was too preoccupied with my job to pay any attention. It was customary for Dan and I to spend Christmas Eve at Aunt Pat's. Her cinnamon buns are so delicious that they fill the entire home with their wonderful aroma. At midnight, we typically simply hang out, watch movies, and unwrap one gift apiece. You know, it's cool. We arrived to her house at around 6 o'clock. I'm lugging this enormous platter of sweet potato casserole that I made. I try, but it's probably not as excellent as hers. Dan also has the presents. I could sense a problem as soon as I opened the door. Too many shoes near the entrance and too many jackets on the rack. Then I heard them. My sister Jen talking loudly about something, my dad's voice and my mother's giggle. I froze at the doorway, literally. Because I stopped so abruptly, Dan ran me over. The casserole nearly flew. 8 years. I hadn't seen any of them in 8 years. They were seated in Aunt Pat's living room as if they were supposed to be there. Most of Mom's hair has turned gray. She used to follow a strict diet. Dad had gained a lot of weight. And Jen, well, Jen had the same appearance. However, she suddenly had 2 children clinging to her legs that I had never met. Aunt Pat, who appeared on the verge of tears, hurried over. "I'm really sorry, Mel. An hour ago, they arrived. Your phone went directly to voicemail when I tried to call. Due to work-related matters, my phone was in my bag on quiet. Excellent timing, correct? I was unable to physically move. My feet wouldn't work. We can leave if you want," Dan murmured, placing his hand on my back. But my mother saw me before I could respond. "Mel," my love. Like we'd seen each other yesterday, she rushed over, tried to give me a hug and all that. I retreated so quickly that I ran into Dan once again. Why are you here? My voice also sounded strange. Hello? Christmas is here. That's how Mom said it. Described everything. Christmas should be spent with family. Dad was still giving his weird half wave while seated in his chair. Although Jen was occupied with her children, I could tell that she was keeping an eye on them. God, I looked perplexed and didn't even know their names. The oldest one, a youngster of around 7, undoubtedly wanted to know who I was, so he whispered something to Jen. I had to set down the dish before I dropped it, so I headed directly to the kitchen. Breathing was necessary. Pat's residence and my safe haven had always been the kitchen. I had spent a lot of time here helping her bake or completing schoolwork. Dan came in behind me. That's how good he is. I'm always aware when I need help. Are you all right? Untrusting myself to speak, I shook my head, and Pat entered, looking wretched. When they arrived, they expressed a desire to put things right. You know your mother, but I warned them it wasn't a good idea to surprise you in this way. Yes, I was acquainted with my mother, queen of doing as she pleased, and then having to face the fallout. Now I could hear the children in the living room having fun. There was Christmas music playing. Everything seemed so wrong. It was as if I had entered a parallel reality in which the previous 8 years had not occurred. Shall we leave? Dan repeated his question. Already he was grabbing his vehicle keys. I nearly said, yes, sincerely wanted to accept. Then I noticed Aunt Pat's expression. She prepared all of this food and arranged everything so beautifully, and here she was in the midst of all of this chaos. No, I responded at last. This is how we do it. I will not allow them to spoil it. Dan gave a nod. Pat squeezes my hand and he understands me. Please give me a moment, I remarked as I made my way to the rear entrance. Air was needed. Outside it was chilly. The cold felt amazing and helped me decompress, but I hadn't reached for my coat. Through the kitchen window I could see. Everyone appears to be acting normally as they go around inside, like any other Christmas Eve family. My mother came out at that point, did not even bring me a coat. Normal. You're going to get sick, she warned. As if she had been telling me that every day for the last 8 years. As if she was entitled to behave like my mother at this point. I had a lot of questions. Why now? Why this way? Why not give us a call first? However, this is what emerged. Really, why are you here? She began to do that thing where she takes a very long time to get to the point. Jen is the subject. It was about Jen, of course. When wasn't Jen the focus? How about her? She is undergoing some adjustments. I waited. This is what Mom always does. She keeps talking in circles until someone forces her to stop. At last, she announced that Jen was divorcing again. I simply gazed at her. Was it meant to be news, like? The divorce of Jen happened about as frequently as the sun rising. She needs some time to rebuild her life and find herself, I said. Her tone unnerved me for some reason. What am I supposed to do with that? Dad came out at that point. I still don't have a coat. By the way, he had the same expression on his face when he informed me that my college funds had been used. He tried to seem businesslike as he said, Mel, for yourself you've done well. Well done. A steady marriage and a nice home. I didn't like the direction this was taking. I assumed they were there to express regret or to apologize. However, no, they still want to utilize me to assist John, even after all these years have passed. We were contemplating. Mom got right in. Perhaps you could spend some time with Ben and Lisa. I honestly believed I had misheard. Just take them till Jen is able to stand again, Dad hurriedly added. She needs time to get her act together, find a new home, and maybe return to school. As I stood there, I tried to take in their words. They wanted custody of Jen's children to go to me, with whom they hadn't talked in 8 years. Are you serious now? Mom remarked. It makes perfect sense. It seemed as if she wanted me to water her plants while she was away on vacation. That large mansion is yours. Dan does a fantastic job. Additionally, you occasionally work from home. Approximately twice a month, I work from home. The children would still have structure and stability. Jen is also in dire need of this opportunity. To what end? I broke up the celebration. The fourth husband. Mom's expression tightened. It's unfair. Unfair. I laughed, but not because I found anything amusing. What's unfair, you ask? Requesting that I raise someone else's children at Christmas after 8 years of quiet. Dad attempted to intervene. Mel's number now. Just no. In any case, where is Jen? Why doesn't she ask me directly? Just as expected, Jen popped up at the doorway. The entire time, she must have been paying attention. You're there. She spoke as if we were all simply chatting. I wanted to know where everyone had gone. She was accompanied by the children, Lisa clutching this teddy bunny that has seen better days, and Ben looked drowsy. Jen pointed to me and Dan, who had stealthily materialized behind me with my coat, and said, "These are your aunt and uncle." Uncle Dan and Aunt Mel, the children only gazed at us. You can't hold them responsible. Ben is 7 years old, Lisa's 5, like she was presenting her dogs or something, Jen went on. They are excellent children, incredibly self-reliant. Ben is even capable of preparing his own breakfast. One of her selling points was the way she said it. Caused pain in my stomach. It should not be necessary for a 7-year-old to prepare his own breakfast. For the first time, Dan raised his voice. There should be more conversation on this, in my opinion. Not on Christmas Eve, perhaps. Jen wasn't amenable to his attempts at diplomacy, bless him. What is there to talk about? Everything is yours. No children, big house, nice employment. It's flawless. I only require, say, 6 months, a year, or more. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Yes, indeed. I need to organize my life, you know. Perhaps take a little trip. Determine my desires. How about their father? Jen waved her hand dismissively as I inquired. Oh, he is worthless. Most likely in Vegas or some other place. I had to inquire. Which one? Dad. First place. 3 or 2? Mom let out a gasp. Mel. Jen, however, only chuckled. Second place. The top one relocated to Canada. Third, too. He doesn't really count, though, because that marriage was dissolved. Jen grabbed my arm as I turned to walk inside because I couldn't handle it. Help me out here, sis, please. I must have this. I'm choking. Her touch on my arm caught my attention. Looked at the children. I looked at my parents, who seemed to be monitoring the entire situation as if everything would go according to plan. It shouldn't have ended with a single word. I assumed things would settle down after that disastrous Christmas Eve, as if they may understand and stop bothering us. Yes, I was mistaken. Jen began to arrive at our home. It started off as sporadic visits with the children. She would invite them over and say things like, "You should meet your aunt and uncle." I would let Ben and Lisa in since I felt sorry for them. When Jen is not there, they are genuinely nice kids. The visits eventually became strange, though. She began to arrive by herself, every time she was aware that Dan would be working remotely. At first, I didn't give it much thought. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Dan works from home, and on those days, I'm typically at the office. The first person to speak was our neighbor. The elderly woman who lives next door essentially observes everything that takes place on our street. She said, "Your sister sure dresses up to visit your husband," when she saw me one day retrieving my mail. I couldn't understand. "What are you saying?" You know, whenever she visits, she's usually wearing those little gowns, even with this cold, and sometimes she stays for hours. At that point, everything made sense. Jen simply happened to drop by all those times. Dan always needed his legal counsel regarding her divorce while she was living alone at home. That evening, I questioned Dan about it. In contrast to his usual demeanor, he appeared quite uneasy. He responded, "I was going to tell you, it has been becoming unsuitable." As it happens, Jen had been actively courting him for weeks. She would constantly find an excuse to touch his arm or lean over his desk while wearing these little dresses. Since he is a good man and she is legally his client for the custody issues we are discussing, Dan continued to attempt to act professionally. The last straw, however, was when she informed him, quote, "You could always upgrade to the fun sister if you ever get tired of the boring version, the dull version." She was referring to me. When she made advances on my spouse, my own sister labeled me dull. Dan instantly turned it off. Told her that she was no longer allowed at our house while I wasn't there, and that she needed to find another lawyer. I was enraged. I immediately called Jen. She was happy as if nothing had gone wrong when she picked up. "Hello, sister. I was just considering coming in tomorrow. Don't go near my hubby." She chuckled. In fact, I laughed. Come on, we were simply enjoying ourselves. With all of this legal stuff, Dan has been really helpful. "Jen, you're overreacting, I promise you. Besides, if Dan thinks I'm beautiful, that's not my responsibility. We all know that I've always been the attractive one." I hung up and contacted my parents because I knew they would realize how bad this situation was. Mom's reaction. When Jen is under stress, you know how she gets. Perhaps she wouldn't be behaving out like this if you had consented to take the kids. This is not even something I can make up. Dan recommended that we set up security cameras and mentioned that we might need proof of her actions to support his predictions. He claimed to have handled enough custody cases to be able to spot the warning flags. I wanted to think he was mistaken. If not for herself, I wanted to think Jen would at least act like a good mother. Then for her children. Dan was correct, though. The doorbell was ringing when we woke up the following morning. Again and again. Something didn't feel right. Ben and Lisa, Jen's children, were sitting on our front steps when I got up and opened the drapes. No gloves, no coats. Lisa clutched that battered plush rabbit as if it were the only thing holding her together, and there were just 2 tiny bags next to them. I scarcely realized Dan was close behind me as I ran for the door. The icy air struck me like a slap as soon as I opened it. It didn't matter, though. Ben rubbed his arms and straightened up rigidly. Aunt Mel's tone was too subdued, too resigned, as if he already understood that he shouldn't hold adults to high standards. Lisa was already being picked up by Dan, who was massaging her icy hands together. I snatched Ben's bag. I opened it later, and it was light to light. All I would find would be a few shirts and some undergarments. Then I noticed the message. Ben crushed it in his little fist. As if he were already expecting to be let down, he paused before giving it to me. My hands were trembling as I unfurled it. "Now they are your concern. Jen, I have to live my life." For a moment, I felt the ground give way under me. I was unable to think, unable to comprehend the tremendous. She departed from them. In fact, she abandoned them as if they were a piece of bothersome luggage she might just throw away. I squeezed the note till it almost tore. Something so primal I couldn't quite identify was rocking me, along with anger and astonishment. Dan's voice was taut with anger that was hardly suppressed. "Now bring them inside." Ben was too heavy for me to lift, but I picked him up and closed the door behind us. Jen had left and had no intention of returning. Dan went into full legal gear after that. He's generally rather relaxed, but this is the most irate he's ever been. I got their baggage while Dad took the kids inside. There were only a few t-shirts and some underpants stuffed into the bags. Lisa was grateful that her teddy rabbit was around since she couldn't sleep without it. We took pictures of the baggage, the letter, and everything else. We are grateful that we have security cameras. At 4:30 a.m., they saw Jen dropping the children off and leaving in her old Honda as I was preparing breakfast for the kids. They were going hungry, hadn't eaten since the previous evening's meal. Dan was making a lot of phone calls. To submit a report, he first called CPS and then the police. Next is his legal partner who focuses on family law. At about midday, my folks arrived. As it happens, Jen texted them to let them know that the kids were now with Mel. Everything is fine. As if leaving your kids on someone's doorstep and then vanishing was completely natural. Mom began by making her customary justifications. Jen is simply overburdened. She requires time. When she's ready, she will return. Dan, please stop that immediately. Jen is no longer at the center of this. This is the abandoning of a kid. It's illegal. They're relatives, even if Dad attempted to argue. We can deal with this in private. No. We're following the book, Dan remarked. Those children are not worthy of becoming Jen's puppets. My mother began to cry at that point. However, she will face consequences if you report her. Yes, I said. That's the main idea. I know they could hear everything, but the kids were in the next room watching TV. Ben continued to gaze at us with this concerned face. At 7 years old, he is far too accustomed to dealing with adult issues. CPS arrived around 2 p.m. They took photographs and interviewed every one of us, examined the home. It was a very pleasant social worker. She spent some time talking to Ben and Lisa alone. She was really worried when she emerged. It turns out that Jen has done a similar stunt before. She had previously abandoned them, sometimes for days with strangers. Since he was 6'6", Ben has been looking after Lisa. He helps her get dressed, prepares her food, and makes sure she brushes her teeth. No child should have to raise their sibling like a parent. We phoned everyone we could think of and attempted to locate Jen. At last, one of her pals broke the silence and informed us that Jen had purchased an airline ticket to Las Vegas. It looks like she's moving in with a guy she met while playing video games online. She didn't even bid her children farewell. Dan requested temporary emergency custody, claims that it's the quickest option to guarantee the children's legal protection until everything is resolved. CPS concurs. If the children are stable, they don't want to enter the system. Their family is willing to take them. My parents are pleading with us over the phone not to destroy Jen's life. They fail to understand. Jen's own life was devastated. Our only goal is to prevent her from ruining her children's life as well. We are currently awaiting a court date. Until then, the children will remain with us. Dan has temporarily transformed his home office into a bedroom for them. He is incredible with them. Tonight, I assisted Ben with his math assignment. He read Lisa 3 stories before bed until she eventually slept off. I'm afraid. I won't lie. Seeing these children sleep on our couch was not how we intended to become parents. How could someone simply leave them? Tomorrow, the social worker will return. I will provide them with an update about my sister's abandonment of her children. For background, see the prior post. A little update on Jen's condition. She continues to publish pictures of herself in casinos and swimming pools in Vegas, as if she hadn't simply left her children behind. In the meantime, my parents' relationship became much more tangled. Therefore, yesterday, CPS summoned a family meeting. In Dan's office, we all took a seat at this large table. Thank God the children were with Aunt Pat since the situation was difficult. The social worker began outlining the system's operation, discussing things like temporary guardianship. My parents continued to nod as if they were listening until she mentioned that Jen may be charged with a crime. Mom broke down in tears and said that even if everyone makes errors, she is still their mother. The social worker then revealed the shocking information. We must talk about alternatives for permanent placement in light of the current situation. Mr. and Mrs. the maternal grandparents are my parents' last name. Prior to considering foster care, you would be our first option. Their faces should have been visible to you all. Dad began to stutter. No, we are unable to. We're too old. There isn't room for us. Mom got right in. In addition, Mel and Dan own that large home. They're young. They are wealthy. It was like seeing a reenactment of history. Different circumstances, same justifications. Brought up memories of that day. They informed me that Jen's wedding had been paid for using my education funds. Bless him, Dan wasn't buying any of their justifications. He pulled out some documents and remarked, "Actually, there are 4 bedrooms in your home. The problem isn't money. You recently took out a home equity loan to remodel your kitchen. Additionally, You are legally required to be given priority placement as grandparents under state law. My father's face flushed. Look here now, young chap. Dan interrupted. No, you see here. He never speaks louder. But gosh, people pay attention when he speaks in a lawyer's tone. Your daughter tossed her kids at us after leaving them behind. While her 7-year-old son is pretending to be a parent to his 5-year-old sister, she is in Vegas paying for hotels. This has nothing to do with your convenience. It has to do with those kids. Try it again, Mom. However, Mel, quit. I mentioned that all of my previous emotions from the college money incident suddenly returned. Don't attempt to force me to clean up Jen's mess. You spent her entire life doing this. Manufactured excuses, put her obligations upon me, and cleaned up after her. No more. A social worker cleared her throat after that. We must record your refusal if you are unwilling to accept custody. The court record will include this. Additionally, the children will join the foster care system if no family members volunteer. They were drawn to that. You see, my folks are quite concerned about their reputation. That explains why Jen's wedding cost so much. Needed to maintain appearances. Record. Mom had a terrified expression. Do you imply that this would be documented? The caseworker quietly said, yes. The fact that you refuse to give custody of your grandkids will be formally recorded. However, it won't be available to the general public. It will be included in the legal record and case file. To let everyone know, Mom's face went white. If it is brought up in court or during an official investigation, indeed. Furthermore, there is nothing prohibiting a family member from sharing it if they so desire. The opening and closing of Mom's mouth resembled a fish struggling to breathe. The hour that followed was crazy. My parents made every effort. Tears, guilt trips, and even offers of money. Isn't that ironic? My parents had signed temporary custody documents before the conclusion of the meeting. Tomorrow, they will pick up the children. Every week, Misty will conduct checks. Dan has ensured that they cannot simply return the children to Jen in the event that she appears. Now, everything must pass via the legal system. It makes me feel strange. Like, I'm sure it's what's best for the children. They require consistency. However, seeing my parents act morally only because they had no choice evokes a lot of the past. Earlier, Ben asked me whether this meant he was no longer responsible for Lisa. God, these children were so deserving of better. I have no idea how things will proceed from this point on. Let's hope for the best. However, I'll keep you all informed. The last update. An update on the current state of affairs with my sister's child abandonment. View earlier posts. All right, Reddit has a lot to tell you about. Do you recall Jen's extravagant lifestyle in Vegas? Yes, that was short-lived. To find her, Dan's legal practice collaborated with the local government. It turns out that she and this guy she met were sleeping at a budget hotel off the strip, playing games, not the upscale resort from which she was sharing photos. She was only loitering in the posh hotels, posing as though she was staying there and snapping pictures. According to the complaint, the police arrived at her hotel room on Tuesday morning. She attempted to explain that the children were okay with their sister and that she was only on vacation. It did not impress the police. Yesterday, they brought her back. I won't lie. It felt strange to see her in handcuffs. She didn't appear to be the self-assured sister who had been pursuing my husband and insisting that we take care of her children. She appeared little and afraid. The accusations are rather grave. Abandonment of a child. Neglect of children. She left them with us earlier. Risk to children. Dan claims several other legal things are awful, but I don't completely grasp them. Last Monday, Ben and Lisa were interrogated by the DA's office. In a process known as a forensic interview, they questioned children about possible abuse or neglect. Ben filled them in on everything. How he has been looking after Lisa since he was 6 years old. How Jen would spend days away from them. How she used the money for herself and occasionally left them without food in the house. When asked about meals during her interview, Lisa broke down in tears and expressed her fear that they might have to go without food once more. I had to get out of here. My folks are in a panic. They keep pleading with Dan to put an end to this. He flatly refused, warning them that they may also lose custody of the children if they attempted to obstruct the judicial proceedings. Mom is mentally sick, yet she attempted to hold. Excuse me? Yes. No. Jen does not have a mental illness. She is merely self-centered, has always been present and conducted a psychological evaluation as part of the case. However, according to Dan, it's regular practice. The Vegas gambling dude. As it happens, he was unaware that Jen had children at all. She described herself to him as a wealthy, unmarried woman seeking adventure. In fact, after learning the facts, he called Dan's office, wishing to assist in the case. Sent screenshots of every discussion they had in which she boasted about being completely free and without obligations. Jen is no longer speaking to any of us. Despite being advised to keep silent by her court-appointed attorney, she sent me this lengthy text last night. Are you content now? At last you managed to get everyone to focus on you rather than me. That everything was planned by you. You were always envious of Mom and Dad's greater affection for me. Congratulations, then. Now that you've destroyed my life, I hope you're content. I didn't answer. What can be said? In the dead of winter, she left her children on my doorstep. This is what she did to herself. Her hotel room was even searched. They discovered receipts for pricey dining establishments and luxury clothing. She was wealthy. She just decided to spend money on herself rather than her children. Additionally, it has been 6 months after Jen's incident. Last week, the legal matter was finally concluded. Jen accepted a plea bargain. She will serve 18 months in a state jail with the option of release after 12 months, along with 5 years of probation. She also forfeited her parenting privileges. The magistrate wasn't joking. Mentioned how her continuous neglect and eventual desertion demonstrated a total lack of concern for her children's welfare. To everyone's astonishment, my parents really got their act together. I believe that something shifted when the court heard what Ben and Lisa had gone through and ultimately saw all the evidence. Mom actually testified in court and stated that Jen must be held accountable. I never imagined that would occur. The children's performance has improved. It's actually better than only pretending to be brave. Better. Although they still reside with my parents, everything has completely changed. The custody agreement required my parents to attend parenting seminars. Dan's suggestion? He's quite intelligent about this. They have placed the children in reputable schools, furnished their bedrooms appropriately, and enrolled them in weekly therapy sessions. After everything calmed down, my parents made an effort to get in touch. Dad apologized in a lengthy email regarding the education fund, how his perspective has changed. Mom says she wants to start over and keeps attempting to call. But what do you know? You can't simply apologize for everything. Silence for 8 years. After that, they only arrive when they are in need. No, I'm finished. Aunt Pat has been incredible over this entire ordeal. She frequently comes to see the children at my parents' residence. Verify that they are indeed caring for them appropriately. The children love her. She is referred to as Grandma Pat. It feels more appropriate than my parents being grandparents, to be honest. Jen is where she belongs, in jail. She wrote me a theatrical letter that was filled with self-pity and excuses, discussing how her time in jail altered her perspective and how she now views the world differently. Not a single question regarding her children. Jen, classic. She is still the main focus. That letter ended up in the garbage. Every other weekend, Dan and I get to see the kids, but not at my parents' place. We remove them after picking them up. Parks, movies, and typical aunt and uncle activities. Last week, Ben asked me if I was upset with my parents. Told him the truth, that adult sentiments for one another can occasionally be complex. However, that does not alter our affection for him and Lisa. I'm frequently asked if I'll ever forgive Jen or my parents. To be honest, there are certain things from which you cannot recover. Indeed, they are now caring for the children, but only because they were compelled to. They are still the same. They just ran out of choices. So here we are. The children are secure. They are stable, even when things aren't ideal. My parents and I just talk about the children. No private discussions, no needless drama. Sometimes the best option is to be far away. Regarding myself, well, life goes on. Oh, and Dan is ecstatic about my pregnancy, which I just found out about. Edit. I appreciate all of your help during this insane adventure. Reddit. You don't realize how much you guys helped. Second edit. Ben and Lisa are aware that they are welcome to phone us at any moment. For this reason, we purchased them their own phones, kids models with parental restrictions. Third edit, to everyone who inquires. The cats still enjoy spending weekends with the children. In fact, Ben is assisting me in teaching the new kitten routines. Final revision. After this post, this account is most likely going offline. After everything is completed, Dan advises against posting too many details online. Know that we're all doing okay.